Weirding Way Media.
80s TV ladies, so sexy and so pretty. 80s TV ladies, stepping out into the city. 80s TV ladies, often treated kind of working hard for the money in a man's world. 80s TV ladies.
Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, where we examine female-driven television shows from the 1980s and how that particular pop culture phenomenon shaped our world then and now. Here are your hosts, Sharon+johnson and Susan+lambert+hatem.
Hey everyone, I'm Sharon.
And I'm Susan. Our guest today is by way of serendipity. We ran into a guy who knew a guy at Podcast Movement Evolutions, but also because I think of the 80s as the Kevin Bacon of decades. They are 1 degree off from everybody.
Everyone knows someone who worked on 80s TV.
So thank you to Muhammad from Podcast Movement Evolutions, who introduced us to our next guest.
Our next guest is Eric Brown, who starred in 2 seasons of Mama's Family as Buzz, Mama's grandson. Eric is now the head of Brown Bridge Strategies, which does strategy and communications consulting for nonprofits.
Mama's Family was a sitcom spinoff of The Carol Burnett Show.
The sketches spawned the series Mama's Family, which ran on NBC for 2 seasons from 1983 to 1984.
And then it was picked up for syndication, like many other 80s TV ladies shows, and ran from 1986 to 1990. Mama's Family starred Vicki Lawrence as the titular mama, Ken Berry, Dorothy Lyman, Rue McClanahan, Betty+white, Karen Argood, and Eric Brown. Hello, Eric Brown. Welcome to 80s TV Ladies.
Well, thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
That's the idea.
We're so happy to have you here. How are you doing? You're coming in from the East Coast?
San Francisco, California.
Oh, our side of town.
Our side. We're finally seeing the sun. It's been like living in the Bible. I'm waiting for the frogs and the locusts to fall because we've had 40 days of rain. I don't know why I live in San Francisco. I have no blood, so I'm always cold. How did I get here? What happened?
All right. Well, we're going to find out today.
There you go.
All right.
You're going to find out a long saga of what got me to this gold.
I am so excited to hear your story because it sounds very interesting from the outside.
Definitely.
So I can't wait to hear the inside.
There are some twists and turns. It's true.
Well, why don't we start with your time in Hollywood? How did you get started and how did you end up on Mama's Family?
Okay. Now I'm going to try and tell this faster than sometimes happens. I was a very young child actor. I got my SAG card when I was 4.
Wow.
My grandmother had a friend who was a talent agent, and I was an extrovert even then. And I think my parents said, oh, the kid's cute and we could use a new dishwasher. So let's, put him to work. And I went for my first audition for Listerine, in which I was meant to blow bubbles through a straw into a glass of milk. I don't know why. I don't remember. I was 4. And I got the job. And I went in and it was in the middle of the summer. I do remember it's like maybe it's just a fake memory, but I remember being hot and kind of sweating. And they were putting whatever that stuff is, Seabreeze on me to keep me cool because they'd have to turn the air conditioner off for sound. And so I sat there all day long, blowing my bubbles through the straw into a glass of milk. And they were like, this kid is he's a natural. What a trooper.
Put him on Broadway.
And so I did commercials for quite some time. And when I was 9, I auditioned for the first national tour of Pippin, directed by Bob Fosse. The show was on Broadway at the time. This is 1974. And I didn't get the job. I got number 2. But the kid who did get the job, apparently his parents didn't realize that he was going to have to go out on the road for 6 months in a bus. And they decided that they didn't want to do that. My mother said, fine, send him in the bus. She kissed me on the head and sent me on my way. And I was out on the road for 6 months in Pippin.
Wait. We may have to do a podcast all about that.
Yeah.
A whole podcast.
So interestingly enough, I've been interviewing all the people who are still alive from that production just to get their perspective. It's like the blind person who tries to tell you what an elephant is by putting his hand on it. Well, I started asking other people about their perception of that tour, including Barry Williams, who played Pippin.
Wow.
And the woman who played my mother came to stay with us last month. We're still in contact. And it was so interesting. 1974, in a bus, 30 states, 6 months, 1 and 2 night stands. They don't really do tours like that anymore.
Wow.
They're called them bus and trucks. And, Bob Fosse stories and traveling around.
Now, was Bob Fosse wasn't with you guys?
No.
Okay.
He barely directed the show. He was, at the time, he was editing Lenny. I think he was doing a revival of Damn Yankees with Gwen Verdon or something. I don't know. I had to look it up. But he was very busy, and his dance captain was the choreographer, and the producer directed the show. He was basically remounting the Broadway production. But Bob Fosse came in for the last run through before you go out on the road, and he gave everybody notes, like really detailed notes. And Carol, who played my mother, said she got the best note she had ever gotten from anybody ever from him. And what he said was, I don't know if you know the show at all, but she played Catherine, who's this woman who lives on a farm, and she's trying to entice Pippin away from his life of debauchery. But she's kind of tricky. And she has this little boy, and I played the boy, and I was 9. And Bob Fosse says to Carol, you're afraid to manipulate him. And she was like, oh my God, I just figured out this role in one line. So
That's fantastic.
that's one of the 500 million Pippin stories. So I did Pippin. I came home, went back to 5th grade after 6 months on the road.
I can't get off Pippin for a second. Hold on.
You have more questions? I'm here.
Did you have an adult with you?
Ish. The swing dancer, the male swing dancer. So the swing dancer is the one who covers all the chorus roles. So he was my chaperone with a very small C and super duper air quotes, because he kind of didn't really chaperone me much. But I was a fairly precocious kid, so I was able to put myself to bed and do things.
But you were 9. You were the only kid in the show.
Yes, I was.
You were the only child on that bus.
Yes, I was.
Wow.
So,
The mama
actually
has a lot of questions.
I'm totally on Benjamin buttoning right now. I'm going backwards. I'm trying to have a childhood now, because I didn't have one as a child. So yeah, that's exactly what happened.
There you go. The 70s. That's the 70s, ladies and
people
gentlemen.
say in the old days, the kids, we used to play in traffic and never got hit by cars. So it was kind of like that. Who knew?
Yeah.
It was an interesting time, a very, very interesting time to be traveling. And we traveled around the South, and the dancers had to be careful where they went. One time I think we were in New Orleans or Baton Rouge, one or the other. And the dancers didn't take their makeup off, just got on the bus and went, and they still had their wig caps, and they would just go back to the hotel and get out of their makeup there, because for whatever reason it was late or something. And so they're walking down the street and they got pulled over for solicitation because they thought they were dressed like sex workers. So that was life on the road.
No, we're just in a Bob Fosse show.
And then the Bob Fosse show with the jazz hands. Yeah. So that was Pippin.
That is so crazy. What an incredible experience. And yet, do you have vivid memories? I mean, 9 is
very much so.
Yeah.
I don't remember 5th grade or 6th grade, but I remember my 6 months on the road. Yeah. I was sitting there with Carol. Oh yeah, I remember when we were in Davenport, we walked over the bridge to Rock Island, Illinois, and we went to the Read More bookstore. Like, how the hell did I remember that stuff? It's like, I have no idea what you're talking. But it was it's true. I looked it up.
I don't know if you ever had an opportunity to compare notes with any other kid actors and find out whether your experience was at all similar to theirs, and that you were on the road by yourself and really no adult supervision and all the rest of it.
I do have a friend. We did Peter Pan. We did a summer stock production of Peter Pan with Tova Feldsha and George Rose. And George Rose played, the Major General on Broadway with in Pirates of Penzance, and Tova is Tova. She's done a million things. And it was a very interesting cast. It was me. Ian Ziering was in it. Do you remember Ian Ziering from 90210?
Yeah.
And Glenn Scarpelli, who was on One Day at a Time.
Yeah.
And this guy, Willie Morrison, who was a Broadway actor. We all ended up, we were just schmoes. We were equity, but we were schmoey equity kids. And we did the show. And Glenn and I have stayed in touch. And he was here for dinner not that long ago. He was in Golda on Broadway with Anne Bancroft. And so he would hang out with Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft. He was in Richard III with Al Pacino on Broadway. So he hang out with Al Pacino. He was in They All Laugh, directed by Bogdanovich with John Ritter and Dorothy Stratton.
Wow.
And then he was on One Day at a Time. He knew Valerie Bertinelli really well and like the whole One Day at a Time ladies of the 80s. So,
all right. Well,
so
you know what?
he
We're
and I-
going to get
we-
a couple phone numbers from you. When we,
yeah, call him, and he's great. We have very similar kind of unchaperoned experiences as young people.
That is just so amazing when you think like now what it is to cast a child on stage
Yeah.
and put them on a show. I mean, you don't do that without 3 adults in a room.
It's crazy. I mean, I understand it. I don't. It makes sense. The fact that Glenn and I, we ended up upright is a great thing, but probably a fair amount of good fortune involved. I'll go through the really fast version. I did a bunch of other theater, and then I ended up understudied on Broadway on Golden Pond. Then I got this movie called Private Lessons. I was cast as the sidekick in Private Lessons. I was a Mr. Bridesmaid, and the lead got fired, and I stepped into the role of the lead. I did that, came back to New York.
And we're going to talk about that from a mama's perspective.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that.
That's a tricky bit right now. But then I went on the national tour of On Golden Pond. And then my senior year of high school, I got an audition from Mama's Family. I went in and I did one short scene in New York on tape. And they called me the next day and said, can you come out to LA and meet with Brandon Tartikoff? And I was like, I knew who he was, and auditioned for him. And I went in there and I went back out into the room and they said, you got the part. We start shooting in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that. So I moved to LA. So I lived at the Sheraton Universal for 6 weeks.
Were you by yourself on this tour too?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
And then I rented a room in someone's house at Woodman and Oxnard out in Van Nuys, and eventually got an apartment down in Hermosa Beach, which was a bad mistake because nobody comes to Hermosa Beach. And I did the show for 2 years, and it was really fun. I didn't have a very big part because who are you going to take lines away from? Betty White, Rue McClanahan, Harvey Korman,
Or those kids.
Lawrence. Let's give the lines to Eric instead. So I used to joke that I was the highest paid performer in Hollywood if you were counting by the word.
Oh my God. All right. So where did you guys shoot Mama's Family?
At CBS Television City, which was weird because it was an NBC show. But Carol had such a relationship with CBS that they let her use her stage, which was the same stage that Price is Right was, and I think maybe even still is, taped on. And so we would, Monday through Wednesday, it would be Price is Right. And then we'd move in on Thursday and shoot on Friday or whatever it was. And that was, so we were at CBS Television City, right at Beverly and Fairfax.
Can you talk about your first day walking on the set or the first table read where you are now meeting all these folks, these legends of television? I don't know how else to describe them.
I used to say, or I still say, that it was like being a bat boy on the 1927 Yankees. We're like, there's Babe Ruth and there's Lou Gehrig, and I'm like, here's your bat, sir. It was really cool. I was probably too stupid to be intimidated, but because I had fancied myself a real actor and had come out of theater and all this other stuff, I also considered myself a professional. And so I went in there to do my thing. And it was scary because I had so few lines. And I will tell you, the first time we taped, might have been the first run through, like you do 2 shows in front of an audience. And the first one is considered the dress rehearsal, but they'll use things if it's good and they'll have something to cut with and all that stuff. So the first time, I go in, I've got 1 or 2 lines in this scene. And if you're in a scene and you only have 1 or 2 lines, you're not in it. It's not like you're reacting. You're sitting there waiting to say your words. So I'm listening for my cue and and the cue comes and I go, like, nothing came out of my head. I'm like, stop tape, stop. I'm like, oh my God, what did I just do? I'm fired. So that was kind of what it was like a lot of the time. I'm just listening for my cue because I'm really not, I'm going to come like, hey, Grandma, how you doing? Great, thanks, bye. I'm going to go to school now, bye. And that's that. I'm going like, why am I in this show? But being with them was extraordinary. And sitting there watching them rehearse was honestly like being a fly on the wall in comedians' heaven. They were really funny. They were incredible kibitzers. They were always futzing about. They were always trying new things. They would write as they went. They'd ad-lib all the time in the rehearsal room. And then the writers would go scrambling back to try and put things in. And characters of the highest order. Rue McClanahan was a quirky, kooky lady from Oklahoma. When she'd make a mistake, she'd go, Eddie Rue, because her full name is Eddie Rue. Like, Eddie Rue, what did you do that for?
Wait, she would talk about herself.
Yeah, she talked to herself in the third person using her given
real name.
Eddie Rue.
That's awesome.
Betty was, as you know, there's the rumors that Betty+white had a kind of a dirty streak.
Yeah.
Like a blue streak. They are true.
Okay. But you've been on the Pippin bus, so was it really?
Then I couldn't handle, but still, she had just a kind of a, she was the, whatever, Sue Ellen's opposite. Yang or yin or whatever. And so the crew would take advantage of that, and they would do practical jokes that kind of steered towards her blue side. And you couldn't or wouldn't do that today on a television set. I will just say, and I won't get into detail, but it was
body. It was a body time.
They were like constantly futzing. It was hilarious and wonderful because they just knew what was funny. And if something wasn't funny, they would fix it or make it better. And because they were all generous and they all knew each other so well, it's not like, like adding lines for yourself, huh, Corman?
Yeah.
No, none of that. They were just, it was like great jazz and funny. You're just always laughing. So we spent a lot of time laughing. And, Harvey Korman was the director.
And there were two directors. How did that work?
Well, we had a camera director. Like Harvey didn't care about where the camera was. He just cared about the performances. So we had two directors. Harvey was there in the room. The camera director's in the room there too, because he's trying to figure out how to shoot it. But Harvey didn't have to worry about that stuff. He would just direct the actors and direct the comedy.
Like it was a theater piece.
Exactly. And then Friday you do two shows, like in the theater.
With an audience.
With an audience. Yeah. You bring the audience. There's a stand-up comic or somebody who's supposed to warm them up and get them excited. And you do one, and then you take a break, and then you do another, and then that's that. And it takes a week, and they do it. It's kind of crazy.
That's so crazy. And then you would take your 18-year-old self and drive
back to Hermosa
Beach.
That's what I did.
So since you spent so much time in New York working in theater on the road, how much television were you able to watch as you were growing up? I guess I'm wondering how you might have known who these folks were, the adult cast of Mama's Family, before you started working on it.
Oh, everybody watched the Carol Burnett show. I wasn't out all that often, but I was a huge fan of the Carol Burnett show. And I sure as heck knew who all those people were. I knew Betty+white. Dorothy Lyman, who was on the show, she was on All My Children. Right. And I knew that.
Right.
She was Opal Gardner. Wow, that's crazy. And she was doing both shows at the same time. I don't know how she did it. That's
amazing.
Yeah.
And it's also amazing that both shows were able to work together and to accommodate that, since they were on different networks, I believe. Wow.
I think so, yeah. No, it was, who knows why or how, but it was super cool. And Dorothy was very funny. Very, very, very funny and great, smart and great. I ended up stage managing a play that she directed Yardley Smith was in this play that we did called Living on Salvation Street. It was an equity waiver play.
When was this? This
is 80.
So in the 80s. So 85? Right around the same time.
86, something like that. I don't know. I think I was probably off the show by then. I was.
Okay.
So it was 86 or 87. But Yardley was discovered by the casting director for The Simpsons, who was watching that play, according to some story I read. So it's
really, you're responsible. You should get a little percentage.
That's right.
You and Dorothy.
I'm only responsible if it went wrong. I'm guilty, but never responsible.
All right. So one of the episodes that I watched that you're in is Mama's birthday.
Uh-huh.
And you got actually this great scene. Like, it's rare that you had a whole scene, right? It is true. Like, the kids were pretty shoved to the side.
Yeah, a bit.
But you had this lovely scene in the attic
All right.
where she's going to tell the story.
Yeah.
The show starts off pretty sketchy, like sketch-based.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Not sketchy.
It was also sketchy. I went back and watched a couple episodes like, whoa, some of this stuff is out there for network television. It was pretty on the edge. But anyway, continue.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, it definitely starts off edgy because there's lots of sort of alluded to sleeping around, but it got warmer. The show got warmer.
Yeah.
Like, it started off being everybody pretty awful to each other, like the sketch.
Yes. Yeah.
And then end of season 1 and in season 2, you had those sort of kind of sad and sweet moments.
You're right. I think early on we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, I don't say that in a bad way. I mean, like, we just didn't know what the show was. And as it happens, if memory serves me, we did 2 or 3 episodes and we went on hiatus to fix it.
Oh.
Because I think the network said, this isn't really landing. We were a mid-season replacement hoping to get on at some point, and I think we ended up on in January of 83. I think we had 13 episode buy for the first season. But the first couple of episodes I think they were a little clunky or something wasn't quite clicking. And I think that's perhaps what you were sensing there, is that this show doesn't know what it is yet. And then it kind of found its feet a little bit. And after we went back to the drawing board a little bit, and I think they just rewrote some of the scripts and spent a little more time thinking about it. And so I went home. I went back to New York after 2 or 3 weeks. And we thought maybe we would get canceled, or we didn't know what was going to happen. And then they brought us back out and we resumed operations. And the first season went pretty well. I mean, it did. I think it did fairly well.
Vicki Lawrence was what, 25, 30?
Let's do the math.
Okay.
She was older than 30. Let's see, 95.
Vicki Lawrence was 18 when she started the Carol Burnett show.
Yeah, which would have been in the late 60s when she started on the show, I believe.
So she was 33?
She's 33. And she's playing someone who's 63.
Yeah, at least, or something, whatever she is.
According to either IMDb or somebody on Mama's birthday, she's turning 63.
Oh, okay.
According to some internet thing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. These numbers don't make any sense anymore because, Rob Lowe is 63. So,
I know it doesn't. People's
Is he really?
But she was playing that character of Mama since she was in her 20s.
Right.
Exactly. Yes. And which is kind of the joke anyway. It's not meant to be an accurate depiction of a person of a certain age. It's just it's some crazy thing.
And it's so insane that entire show was built around that concept.
Yes.
But it worked. It worked on the Carol Burnett show.
It did.
That's what it was. Yeah.
It did. It's
and then people who are older than her are playing her daughters.
Children.
Her children.
It's a big goof.
Like, there was the moment when Betty+white is hooking up with a younger man.
Oh, yeah.
There's big conflict. I'm blanking on the name of that episode, but, Mama is upset that Betty+white, who's in her 50s at that point,
At least, yeah.
as an actress, is hooking up with someone in their 30s who is actually the same age as Vicki Lawrence, who's playing someone in her 60s who couldn't possibly have a daughter that age. But that's fine because it's the magic of television.
You know what? We invented the television metaverse. We just didn't know it.
It was like WandaVision, early WandaVision.
There was a fair amount of suspension of disbelief. It's true.
Yes.
All right. Well, what were some of your favorite episodes?
Definitely doing the 50s dance thing.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Super duper fun.
That looked like it must have been a real hoot.
It was really, actually, all right. We're on video here. I have something really cool that's, so this.
Oh my God.
Is the character. And so Rhett, who is our, he's Bob Mackey's assistant and he was our costume designer. And then here's a picture of Karen and me.
Oh my God.
In our costumes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyway,
that is amazing.
That was really fun. As it happens, I was a tap dancer as a kid.
Oh my goodness.
Well, this is why you were in Pippin.
And no tap and Pippin. I don't think.
I know, but the fact that you could meant
I could have. And I always wanted them to let us do a show where Ken and I dance because Kenny's was a great tap dancer.
Mm-hmm.
And they said no. He was like, wouldn't it be great if Buzz and his dad had like entered the talent show or something and did a tap thing? And who cares whether it makes any sense or not? Because for all the reasons we already discussed. But it didn't go. That would have been my favorite episode.
So the episode that didn't happen but should have happened. I'm in. That sounds great.
I think it would have been so much fun. There was another one where we're going to the prom and
curfew
makes the curfew one makes two different curfews. That was fun. I had stuff to do and I got some laughs and things like that. But it was hard. It was like I didn't have much to do on that show.
The curfew one stands out for me because, Sharon has a similar story. I think that one would resonate with her emotionally because she had a brother.
I think it was called Double Standard.
Double Standard.
That was the name of the episode. Double Standard. Did that happen to you, Sharon?
Oh, that was just sort of my life. My older brother, who I love dearly, by the way, was a year older and
shout out to Michael.
Yes, had a lot more freedom as a male child than I did as a female child. So just the way it was. But
Sorry, you had to go
I've gotten over it.
Until you're reminded by Mama's Family episodes.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which triggered you.
But that's the interesting thing about the show is the character and the family have a little, all in the family like element to them. Mama seems very traditional for the 80s. She seems like a 50s mama in many ways. And yet her son moves back in with his kids because his wife has left him. She also lives with her sister, played by Irma McClanahan. And then, chaos ensues, right? There's lots of sex jokes because then Ken Berry's character starts dating the next door neighbor and then they get married and are, in theory, constantly having sex.
Right.
And then they slip in something like, well, women shouldn't have a less curfew than guys. Like suddenly they're like standing up for, girl power.
Right. They did whatever they wanted. I think that was the short version. Like, where can we find comedy? And they didn't care. Whether it was Battle of the Sexes, whether it was Generation Gap, whether it was, they were certainly mining class issues.
Mm-hmm.
But where can we find funny things? Because their first love or their first responsibility was to the joke.
What was funny?
Yeah. What's funny?
What was going to be funny?
Where can we find some funny? And Carol could find funny anywhere. Wherever she went, she found funny. There was this one episode we did. This is one of my favorites. I don't even think I was in it, or if I was in it for a minute. But where they did a community theater, and there's this. It was very Waiting for Guffman.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that they looked at that episode. I would be surprised if they hadn't when they made that movie, but. The director is, of course, this failed whatever, and he's got this very funny hairpiece, but we never talked about the hairpiece, the actor who was playing this character. And then when we did this show for the second time, not the first time, the second time, Harold reaches over and pulls the hairpiece off, and he's got his guy's totally bald. And I, to this day, do not know if she was planning. I mean, she was planning it, whether she told anybody.
Whether she told him.
We never rehearsed it. She just did it in the final tape air show. And that, to my mind, she's like, oh my God, this is going to be very funny. I'm going there. And like I said, we never rehearsed that. We never rehearsed that moment. So part of me thinks that we just did it.
You just did it.
How did the rest of the cast react when it happened?
I think we all just melted.
Did you break a lot? I mean, was it hard not to break?
Yeah.
Watch Carol Burnett play Eunice, which is insane.
She was great.
I'm thinking of Rasha Mama.
Yes.
In which they, tell the story of how Mama ended up in the hospital from each of their points of view. And oh my God, that is a lot of humor. And each time is pretty amazing. But in particular, it's a Carol Burnett. I mean, although Betty, they all have, Dorothy, Betty+white, they all are spectacular.
And because they're so strong in sketch, they were so grounded, they could do whatever they want. It's like being a great jazz improviser. you knew what key you were in, you knew what the time signature was. As long as you stayed on beat and stayed in key, you could go wherever you wanted. And as long as they hit their mark and found their light, they could do what they wanted to do. And they did. That's why they break, is because they just couldn't stand not acknowledging the genius of the thing that person standing in front of them just did. So
You had to.
you'd be hard to imagine a human being not be moved by that. So that's why and they were having fun. And if you ever go see improv, the funniest moments are when the cast starts laughing, because now you were all in on the same joke.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there was a kind of a flavor of that in this show, because it was absurd. It's all the premises were absurd. So we know what we're looking at. It's not like we're looking at real life. We're looking at something different. And so that gave them flexibility to do different things. And because they were so talented and so incredibly well schooled at this stuff, they could do things that mere mortals couldn't. Mere mortals like myself. Mind you.
And did you and Karen bond a little bit, who played your sister? Because you were like, okay, we're just the flute section here. So
we're the furniture. Yes, we did. We were friends. Actually, Dorothy and Karen and I were friends, and we would hang out and do things and stuff like that. Dorothy, of course, had lots to do, but Karen was great, and we were pals, and we'd hang out, do things.
And so any special guest stars? I have one that in particular I want to ask you about, but is there any special guest stars that you worked with that you're like, oh, that was super fun? Oh,
no. Actually, the ones that I was not in the show where Jack Guilford and Imogene Coca came on, but because they were there and I didn't know who they were, I just went and spent the week sitting in the rehearsal room anyway, even though I was not in that episode. I mean, these, like they are the masters of the live television era. And, the Prince Caesar show and all that other stuff, like extraordinary. So those are big. But we had so many fun people who would come through. Jerry Reed was great.
That's who I want to ask you about.
He was amazing.
Was he great in person?
He was. He was great.
I'm a huge Smokey and the Bandit fan.
He was great.
And I love Jerry Reed.
There were a few others who were really fun and cool.
Fred Willard.
Was Fred Willard?
Fred Willard,
yes. You're right.
Fred Willard. Fred Willard was, oh my God, he was amazing. Just, again, he plays Fred Willard. Fred Willard is Fred Willard is Fred Willard. And so he has that very dry, deadpan-y thing 24 hours a day. It's not like when they turn up the camera, he goes like, it was just Fred Willard the whole time. Fun. Oh, Bill Wyndham.
Yes.
Bill Wyndham, that guy was incredible also. I mean, a terrific actor.
Yeah, really spectacular. I was like sitting there going, who is that? I thought it was Hal Holbrook for the longest time.
Right, yeah.
There was real pathos often, surprisingly, particularly in the second season.
Again, the other thing is once you know something's going to be funny, then you get to butts around with it, which is, I think, to your point. And maybe it's the network is saying we need to make them nicer or whatever, but I wasn't privy to those conversations.
You weren't into network conversations? Eric knows a thing or two. He's been on the PIPPIN bus.
I was just trying to keep my job.
I was going to say, so what are you thinking? What are you feeling when you're on this show? And you're like, I'm not being used enough, but I'm in a successful sitcom.
Funny, because my agent was Wilt Melnick, and I'm not making that up. He's like the most agenty name in Hollywood. Wilt, who's a great guy. And as soon as I got on the show, he's like, I got to get you off the show. You don't have enough to do. I got to get you something better. Which, it wasn't his fault that he failed. But, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm learning. I'm here. I'm happy I got to go to the network affiliates conventions, which is what the upfronts used to be called.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they send a limousine to your house and they give you a voucher for a tuxedo rental and you hobnob with Morgan Fairchild and those people. And like, I'm on television and so far so good.
Yeah.
So I was not complaining, put it that way. I wanted more to do, but I also understood why I was doing what I was doing. And I just wanted the chance to be funny. And the normal person in a scene full of crazies can be really important and valuable, and they didn't use me that way. So if you think about Marilyn on the Munsters, or in any improv or sketch comedy, there's always one person who represents the audience who goes like, that's crazy. And so they become the proxy for the audience. That's the normal person who's reacting to the madness around them. And I could have played that role if they had wanted to, but like, I don't blame them. Why give me any lines when you got all these other people there? So when the show went off the air, which was disappointing, let's just say it was disappointing. And then when they brought it back and they didn't bring me back.
Yeah. So how do you find out in the 80s that your shows
got canceled?
Yeah.
The producer calls you up. It's like, we got canceled.
Mm.
And then we're off, and then reading things in the trade that they may bring us back, which was exciting. We were going to go back in original syndication, which was exciting. And then they announced that it's back, and I got the same call from the same producer saying, like, hey, good news, bad news. Good news is we're back. The bad news is not you. And they made the boy character big, like, dumb guy. So he was funny. He was more, it was more of the group. So they didn't have a normal person who was, I think they just decided that from a comic perspective, it didn't work. So whether they're right or not, I couldn't say, but I mean, Alan Kaiser was great. He was very funny. The show was funny. I don't blame anybody. That's how it goes.
Yeah. All right. So how did Vicki Lawrence and Carol Burnett get along?
They seem to really work well together.
I know that later, I think it had to do with the pickups for syndication, from what I've read.
Oh, that they didn't get along?
And then they later made up.
Huh. Interesting. I didn't spend a lot of time reading about it, to be honest with you, but and maybe it had something to do with the fact that Carol and Joe Hamilton had divorced by that point, or so there may have been, and it was Joe's show. He owned it, but she must have had a part.
I think it had to do with that. Yeah.
It probably got complicated.
Yes. When your personal lives and your professional life are entwined.
Yeah. And like Joe Hamilton is funny because he was the opposite. Now, my recollection is very serious guy.
And he was married to Carol Burnett and produced
he produced the
Carol Burnett show and Mama's Family.
Yeah. Just a very serious dude. And I always found that to be interesting. You know, you never know. People.
Well, it's the anchor that lets somebody,
Yeah, the business guy. And Vicki's husband, Al, similar.
Okay.
Al was her makeup man on the Carol Burnett show. And he looks like a truck driver. He's like a big, strapping, macho dude, and he's a makeup man, which is not what you think of when you think about, a makeup person. But and he became Vicki's manager, and he was, I think, very protective of her image and her work, and he kind of managed that. And it's possible that he was also kind of her interlocutor between her and Joe, or her and Carol. So who knows what that was all about? But he was also just not the person you would think to be married to someone who is funny and creative, because Joe he just looked like a football player. Vicki would have us out to, she lived out in the valley, like wherever, Thousand Oaks or something like that. It's a fabulous house. And she'd invite people to cast over for her parties, things like that. And it was fun, I'll tell you.
It sounds fun. And, so Vicki Lawrence is still where she does a show that she calls a 2-woman show about her and Mama. Have you seen the show?
My mother's seen it in Las Vegas.
I want to go see that.
My mother lives in Las Vegas. Bless her.
Okay.
I would love to go see it. I did see Carol do her show here in San Francisco, I think. People still watch the show.
Yes.
It's still popular. This is 40 years ago.
It was such an iconic character. Her and Eunice, they
built something great. I mean, it's really cool.
The absurd version of what was reflective of a lot of what was happening in female relationships in the 80s. I think I would say my parents and the generation. And there was something about Mama and the Eunice relationship that, while it was funny, it also hit. You knew it. You knew people that were that close to that.
Yeah, mothers and daughters.
It was mothers and daughters, but it was
not easy relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're challenging. And so if you can find the humor in that and still tell the truth, people, they want to see that.
But that's what builds the comedy too, because whether your relationship with your mother as a woman is as extreme as Eunice and her mother's is, there's a kernel of, I see that situation, or I've seen it elsewhere. There's a level of groundedness in it that makes it funny. And hopefully you don't have the kind
and you're like, well, at least we're not that.
Exactly.
It also makes you feel better about your own
existence.
But what do they say? Comedy is tragedy plus time.
Exactly.
Yes. So,
Yes. And all right, so there was some singing on the show. Did anybody ever sing? Because I want.
She sang Little Grass Shack.
Yeah.
Well, we were up in the attic. She sang Little Grass Shack.
Little Grass
She finds
Shack.
the ukulele, and in her classic way, she picks it up and she plinks it. But like by picking it up, she makes a noise with it. She looks at it, and finds and sees the moment and starts to play. So she did do that as Mama, of course.
As Mama.
Kind of funny. Was that a different one?
Yeah, in the first episode of season 2, I can't.
You know the show a lot better than I do.
Well, no, we've just been spending some time refreshing because
maybe you're right. Maybe it was different.
no, because it was part of the story she was looking forward to performing and everything, and with you guys at the dance as that 40s theme, and then she's plunking on the ukulele, and you guys walk in and tell her that they've decided to do something else.
Right.
And she's so disappointed, but I can't remember what song it was, and I just watched it the other day.
But I did get the jitterbug with Vicki Lawrence.
Yes,
that was probably one of the highlights of being on that show.
All right, and in my imagination, sometime backstage, she sang "The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia" too.
Maybe it was on the episode where Imogene Coco and Jack Dillon were there. I wasn't in it.
All right. So let's take a break and then we'll come back. We have to talk about Remington Steele.
Oh, yeah. Can't wait.
And some other things and what you're up to now.
Yeah.
So we'll take a break. All right, we're back. We get to talk about Remington Steele and other things, and I want to hear more about your podcast and where you are now. But let's go to Remington Steele.
Okay, what do you want to know?
All right, so you were in Blood is Thicker Than Steel.
Yes.
And you were about 18.
Yeah, I think I was 17 or 18.
Is this something you did before Mama's Family then?
No, it was during a hiatus.
Okay.
Yeah. In the show, Remington and Laura have been hired to sort of protect a billionaire who's going to testify against other bad billionaires, but he wants his kids protected. And so he hires Remington and Laura to protect his 2 kids. You play the son who's 15, 16. And then there's a daughter that's like 8 or 9.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they have to go take you away and then ultimately get you to Arizona from LA. And then, there's bad guys after you the whole time.
Of course. Hijinks ensue.
Hijinks ensue.
And you have a big crush on Laura Holt.
Right, which was easy.
Okay, so what was it like working with Stephanie Zimbalist and Pierce Brosnan?
They were still at the beginning of their careers. Pierce Brosnan was a long way from James Bond.
Yeah.
And the character I play, so I play this kind of arrogant, rich kid who has a crush on Laura. And I had played a version of that in Private Lessons, where actually I was a innocent, naive, kind of stumbling rich kid who has this relationship with this older woman in her plot to extort money from him, and hijinks also ensue. You can never make that movie today. That's for sure. I'm surprised that they even allow anyone to watch it. And my wife is mad at my mother for letting me be in it, but I landed on my feet, and so that's how that goes. Anyway,
you think you're getting out of more questions about that? We're kind of going to circle back around, but thank you for starting it.
I wasn't able to close the door on that conversation. No, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But so I'm in this kind of playing a little slightly typecast character and I have to tell you, I was head over heels in love with Stephanie Zimbalist. She was fabulous and funny and nice, and we taught each other to juggle on the set. And Pierce Brosnan was a gentleman and humble. He was like the Hugh Grant without all the terrible stuff. He was like really nice. He used to make jokes about his hair, how it was just a piece that he would put on the hat rack when he walked into the office. He was, his wife would come by. This is his wife who passed away. I think she passed away in the 90s. He was utterly devoted to her, and he was like, "Oh, my wife is coming! I'm so excited." It was really fun, and we basically did most of the show inside an RV that was on this sound stage, and they would rock, shake and bake the RV. So it's kind of the RV show. But it was so much fun. It was so much fun. I can't begin to tell you how much fun it was.
Well, and you had really great scenes with them. Like you had scenes with Laura that were really meaningful. Then you had like this scene where you stop being kind of a jerky kid and become like, hey, what's it really like to, you trying to get some guy advice about girls from Pierce Brosnan's from Remington Steele. And that scene is so neat.
Well, the other thing is that, okay, I'm kind of blocked on this other show where I don't get to do much. And if you're the lead guest, it's called top of the show. And they pay you the most money that they make available. So I was the top of the show, lead guest on this show. Which I'm like, wow, this is fun. I see how this could go if I play my cards right. And got to work with these great people. I knew the show. And Pierce Brosnan was already kind of very popular. He was a big star at the time. And Stephanie also. Barbara Peters directed, and she was like a great director. A little no nonsense. She knew what she wanted, but there were very few women directors in television at the time. And that was fun to work with her. And she just was great, especially with television, which goes so fast. The crew was a good crew. It was kind of they had been doing the show together as a unit for quite some time, or a year and so, and it wasn't kind of heavy turnover. So everybody knew exactly what to do, and they just plug you into their machine. Yeah, and say your lines, hit your light, hit your mark, find your light, moving on. Well, you get two takes, and we're going. So you have to be on your toes. They don't have time to mess around.
Well, Barbara Peters was that the first female director that you worked with? Or did you work with others?
Good question. Well, I don't think I had done the play with Dorothy yet. So I ended up understudying in that play, and then I took over the role at some point. So I did work with her. I think probably not. I think you're right. I think Barbara was probably my first female director. It was a great experience. Like I said, I had such a crush on Stephanie. And we ended up doing a couple of celebrity event type things. I used to do the golf tournaments and the skiing things and whatever. There was this promoter in Hollywood named David Mirisch, who was, I think, a cousin or something of Walter Mirisch, the great famous producer who just passed away. And David, I was on his celebrity softball team. I did a lot of golf. I was a golfer. I did tennis. I think I was in a celebrity paddleboard thing. I once did a bowling event in Rochester. Denzel Washington was on our basketball team.
Oh my God.
Wow.
When he was on St. Elsewhere. Yep. Some really fun. Jack Coleman, who was on Dynasty.
Was this like the time of like the night of the network stars, or the
Battle
of the Network Stars?
Well, except it wasn't televised. Yeah. We'd just go around and do things. But I met some of the super cool. Lauren Green was there. Susie Chaffee was at one. Mary Hart and Dean. What was Mary Hart's boyfriend? Dean, guy from Little House on the Prairie.
I know who you're talking about. I had the biggest crush on him. Dean Butler.
Yes.
Dean Butler.
Yeah.
Dean Butler.
Golf tournament in Dallas, Fort Worth. He was in Fort Worth. And Mickey Mantle and Billy Barty were at this golf tournament.
Wow.
I shot pool with Billy Barty.
Okay.
Such a weird life I had. And so Billy Barty, he said, I have a handicap. I get to have an advantage over you. And I was like, what's the advantage? And he'd reach and you'd be about to line up a shot, and he would reach up behind you and grab you between your legs. And that was his advantage.
Now hold on.
He reserved the right to do that at any time. It was very hard to beat him in pool. With social media, you feel like you have a relationship with people that you don't know.
Right.
And back in those days, folks were behind the curtain. You didn't have a relationship, and you got to see them up close, and it was a different kind of experience. It was also kind of sweet. People were, polite. They didn't know when they yelled at you.
But they were actually nice.
Well, because it was such a
better
treat.
manners then.
Yeah. And it was such a treat. It was special. And so people tended to treat it that way, I would think.
And now, I mean, they have that crazy big, what do you call it, autograph thingy in Hollywood once a year, but it's expensive. There's a big long line of celebrities signing autographs, and I don't know, it seems a little different than back then, where you got to play. Oh, you could play golf. If you signed up, you could play in a celebrity golf tournament.
Were you a good golfer?
Yeah, I was a good golfer as a kid. I am not anymore a good golfer. I grew up in Queens, and on a public course in Queens, where the courses in the 1970s, 80s in New York was not a good time to be in New York and using any of its public services. So they didn't really water the course. You had to take a hammer and a nail to get the to get the tee in the ground.
The tee in the ground.
But yeah, so when I came out to California and I had nothing else to do, I'd play golf.
Since you brought up Queens, do you want to tell us about your time in Queens and how you were first famous? Although I guess you were first famous being a 4-year-old.
I was.
Blowing bubbles in milk.
And it was funny as a child actor, where I kind of had no childhood, as you might have imagined. Like someone was like, "How you doing?" "Horrible." You know, I'm 7 years old. I'm in second grade. Like, "How you doing?" "Horrible. I haven't worked in months." You know, it's like some old vaudevillian or something like that.
Smoking a cigarette. Come on.
Let me tell you, it's tough out there, kids.
I mean, were you enjoying yourself as a child actor? Yes. I mean, because it was burning an energy for you.
Right. I was good at it. It was, when you get good feedback from people about things that you're good at, makes you happy.
Yeah.
So I was okay with that. You're referring to my famous chicken story. When I was a kid, I was walking down the street with a bunch of my friends, and we saw this white flash coming out of this bush, and we looked at it, and there was a chicken in the bush. And, this is 1979 or something like that. And it's not like there's, handlebar mustache, waxing, home chicken, grow your own chickens and make your eggs thing in Queens. That was not, like, there was no chickens in Queens. You did. So it was weird.
Do people now have a handlebar handlebar to grow your chicken? Hey, kid, we're growing the chickens over here.
Like hipsters and their backyard chickens. There's a big thing. We didn't have that. I grabbed the chicken, carried it home with my friends. And the first thing I did was I called the New York Post. And I said, "Hey, I found a chicken in Queens. Send a photographer." And they did. And so I was...
How old are you?
I was like 12, I think. And so I tell the story because you would think that this is like, I'm the idiot, savant, PR genius. But the problem was I didn't tell the photographer that we were looking for a good home for the chicken. And so the caption on the photograph is, "It's the good deed for the day." Like, look at these wonderful boys who found this chicken and so
and are adopting it.
Spent the winter in our garage where we would normally park a car. And because I do communications strategy for nonprofits and foundations and others, I always tell these people that this is my first story of abject failure as a communications strategist, because I didn't have a goal. But it definitely a weird story about life in Queens, that's for sure.
Well, dare I ask what ultimately happened to the chicken?
Well, another good story there. Like, one good story gives you another. My mother was on the lookout for a good home for the chicken, and nice lady, and saw some story on the news about this farm in New Jersey that took in wayward farm animals and things like that. So she called them up, said, "We have this chicken. We'd be delighted to take your chicken, and we promise we were not going to eat it. It's just going to live out its life on the farm. But meet us at the Broadway Theater where The Wiz is playing, because we have a dog in the show." So our doggy is Toto in The Wiz. So we met at the Broadway Theater. I think we watched it. Well, no, we couldn't because we had the chicken. So we uploaded the chicken, like a chicken transfer at the Broadway Theater, where it could now be friends with the Broadway star Toto. And they took the chicken off to New Jersey, and it lived its life.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Eric, I don't know what your life is.
When you figure it out, please let me know. I was like, all these stories have the added benefit of truth. I've always, I don't know, I always zagged.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense after a few years in show business that you would think, yeah, let's call the Post.
That seems newsworthy to me.
Yeah.
I was an avid newspaper reader, even from a very, very early age. I always had a paper under my arm, usually the Daily News. And then it wasn't until I was much older that I figured out to read the Times. But I always kind of fashioned myself as a kind of a blue collar kind of New Yorker. I was a Mets fan. And I had an English teacher in high school who said that you'd make a great, who handed me what I hoped was not a backhanded compliment by saying, I think you'd make a great writer for the Daily News.
Okay, so let's go to private lessons.
Okay, fine. I'm not afraid.
You get cast as the best friend.
Right.
You're 15 years old.
Yes.
And then you guys start shooting.
Yeah, I'm a sophomore at St. Francis Prep in Queens, a Franciscan high school.
Okay.
So work that out.
They shoot this movie in Arizona based on Wikipedia.
Yes, that's so far so good.
And they shoot it in Arizona because there's like fewer child labor laws.
Correct. That is also correct.
And basically the story is a 15-year-old is seduced by a 30-year-old maid to your family.
Right. Governess. She's an immigrant, and she and the chauffeur, played by Howard Hessman, Yes.
have basically come up with a plan to ultimately blackmail you, right?
Correct. Yes. That's the story.
But then the two of you fall in love.
Ish.
I'm
not sure that character was ever really in love with my character, but still.
So it may have started the genre of 30-year-old women seducing 15-year-old boys.
Yeah.
And that being a really cool 80s thing to do in movies.
Well, The Graduate was obviously Dustin Hoffman played an older kid, wasn't 15.
Yeah.
But it was the May, December.
Yes.
And that, of course, was a highbrow movie. So that was different. This was a low budget film. But the funniest thing about that movie, it was based on a novel, a black comedy by Dan Greenberg, who was a very accomplished author, and he had essays in the New Yorker and that kind of thing. You wouldn't think that it would be fodder for a lowbrow sex comedy. And what ended up happening was when the film was shot, it was shot as a black comedy. Very dark. And they tested it, and it tested not well. They didn't like seeing this kid being manipulated and all that other stuff. So they lightened it up considerably and reshot a bunch of scenes and turned it into a kind of a very Porky's-like sex comedy, or what was perceived like that. And then it did kind of set that genre in motion. There was the one with Matt Lattanzi and somebody.
Class, and then there were several private school.
There were more privates. The producer was trying to, he was mining that franchise. There was My Tutor. I think that's the one with Matt Lattanzi. There was a couple others. So, it did kind of set that thing into motion.
And were you just like, I'm happy to have a job, and then I'm happy to get promoted in my job?
I was happy to get a job, happy to be in a movie, definitely happy to get promoted. And so I've gone back and watched it, and it was a really fun part to play. So I played a naive kid, which I was not. By that point, I was I fancied myself I had been on Broadway. I had done all this stuff. So it was a chance to play comedy. Like, I did a lot of physical comedy. I walked into walls. I banged my head. I fell off bicycles. I did all my own stunts. That was fun working with Howard Hessman, who I had loved on WKRP in Cincinnati, and Ed Begley. And it was directed by a guy named Alan Meyerson, who used to direct The Committee, which was a sketch company. Howard and Ed and another guy, Dan Barrows, all these guys did sketch comedy together. So in a sense, these were also great comedians, and they were trying to make a black comedy, and it didn't work out. And they ended up kind of changing its focus, and it made a lot of money. But these were all really good professionals who were doing, and Jan de Bont was the cinematographer.
Jan de Bont was the cinematographer, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Who went on to,
Direct Speed.
and shoot Die Hard before he directed Speed.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He shot Die Hard. So, these were no schmoes that we were working with. So when we were on the set, it was a real movie. And people were like, oh, you're in this crappy sex comedy. It's like, actually, it wasn't. It was a real movie with really terrific folks. I learned a lot. And I was in almost every shot in the movie.
And it starred Sylvia Crystal as the maid, the governess.
And Sylvia Crystal was Emmanuelle. This is a Dutch actress who played Emmanuelle, which was one of the famous softcore porn movies or whatever you want to call it. These days, it was wouldn't qualify for like a decent Netflix.
I was going to say it might not even be cool enough for HBO.
Exactly. Anyway, it was hard work when we were shooting 16-hour days, 6 days a week. You have 1 day off, and I was in every shot almost. And it was exhausting, fun. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about film acting. It was kind of cool.
I mean, did you feel like you were 15 or did you feel like you were an adult?
I'm starting to feel like I'm 15, but then no. I felt like I was, how you doing? Horrible. I haven't worked in a week. So I took it very seriously, and I had work to do, and I needed to make sure that I knew my lines and hit my mark and found my light and played the moment.
But I would not send my 15-year-old off to Arizona. Now I have a very different 15-year-old.
Doesn't matter. I wouldn't send any 15-year-old. Like I said, my wife is still mad at my mother. How could you let him do that movie? And because there were nude scenes. It was,
it was inappropriate by the standards of today.
Downhill with a tailwind. It was inappropriate. It was inappropriate. You should not do that. You should cast an 18-year-old.
Yes,
someone who's. Yeah. As it happens, I don't think it did any lasting damage to me, but could have.
Yeah. And did anybody acknowledge that on the set? I'm just so curious. No, it was just, okay, stand there, do this, we do care. We do not care that we are putting a underage person in the position to work 16 hours, A. B, in a position to do basically sex scenes with a 30-year-old person.
No one seemed to notice.
Do you think the fact that you had been working since you were 4 helped you in terms of getting through that experience or working on that with that subject matter?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was just acting in a scene, and I was a little professional, so it never occurred to me. There's this one scene. I don't think I've told this story lately, where I'm in a bathtub and I don't have anything on, and I have to get out, and I'm with Sylvia. We're in this bathtub together, and I'm naked. And in the scene, she starts to, soap me up, and I get scared, and I jump out of the bathtub, and I have to back to the camera at exactly the right angle, if you understand the meaning. And Jan, the DP, he would scream, "Cut! I saw something I'm not supposed to see." I was not backing out at the right angle, and he would just go, "Cut! I saw it again."
So they had nothing on you.
No.
Oh my goodness.
No.
But for you, it was just, okay, well.
Okay, I must have not got the angle right.
Mm-hmm.
I was too busy
Being
trying to do my job to notice that that was not the thing.
You were on the PIPPIN bus.
and on and backstage during quick changes and things like that. Yeah. So there's nothing I hadn't done or seen or anything. And anyway.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, that's no wonder they got you to hit on Stephanie Zimbalist 3 years later.
That was so innocent and
it was so sweet
and sweet.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that crazy? I think about that. I go, I can't believe that. That's crazy. Now I look, no. You can't do that.
Literally, the poster says, "What happened to him should happen to you."
Right. Who do you think the audience for that marketing campaign was?
Yeah, exactly.
Not the 80s TV ladies audience, I'll tell you that right now.
Perhaps not.
But great people. So who were some other amazing people that you worked with, like Jerry Reed and Howard Hesseman? I'm still not over the Jerry Reed of it all.
Jerry Reed. Who was the guy who was the dad in My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Michael Constantine.
Mama's Family.
That's right. Man.
Harper versus Harper.
I assume he played the judge.
He played the judge.
Of course. He was great. He was such a sweet man. I think he also recently just passed. He was, they got the good stalwart, great TV people.
They did.
Whoever they wanted would come.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine they had.
You can't say no to Carol Burnett.
No, nor should you.
No.
And, we haven't talked much about Harvey Korman, but Harvey Korman was really one of the most hilarious, crazy, neurotic, fun, goofy people I ever met. I'll tell you a funny Harvey Korman story.
Please do.
And, so there was this one point where he was convinced he had cancer, and
in real life.
Go in real life. Yeah,
okay.
It's like, I'm going into the doctor. I have this thing on my finger or whatever it was. I'm convinced I have cancer, and he was really nervous about it. He's a lot of anxiety, and he said, "This reminds me of when I had divorced my wife." And she moved out, and I was living in this house in Hancock Park, this great big house in Hancock Park, and I was all alone. It was at a moment when there was a slasher who was slashing middle-aged men, and I was convinced that I was going to be the victim of the slasher, and so I would spend hours and hours locking the windows and the doors. And he was in group therapy at the time. He told this story to his group therapy, and he said that his therapist, who's this actual Viennese therapist, said, "The wonder to me, Mr. Korman, is that you are not the slasher." So, there's Harvey, who's absolutely convinced he has cancer, and he's talking about his his previous terrifying moment of neuroses, and poking fun at himself by revealing that his group therapy therapist had thought he was a slasher. I mean, there's so many layers to Harvey's wonderfulness and his kind of ability to laugh at himself. And at the same time, he was genuinely concerned. And that was also a way of him being kind of honest and open to people. Like, I'm really concerned. I'm worried. And here's last time I was worried, and somebody made fun of me in group therapy. So that was like a quintessential Harvey story, because he was so genuine and so kind of dear. And
that's marvelous.
Oh my God. And now I want the television show of Harvey Korman in group therapy in 1984.
That would be hilarious. Yeah, he was.
What if you walk into your group therapy and it's Harvey Korman? Like, you're like, okay, well, I have to stay, but really this is never going to be about me.
I may not get my needs met, but at least I'll be entertained.
Wow. Okay. So Dick Clare and Jenna McMahon created the show.
There we go. Okay. And then there was a Liz and Rick, who were the head writers.
Yes.
Liz
Sage.
Sage, thank you. And Rick Hawkins?
And Rick Hawkins.
Okay. All right.
You're right. Yes.
40 years, I'm pulling this stuff out of my
it's
lid.
very good. Very impressed. Rick Hawkins and Liz Sage wrote together.
Right. And they were basically the head writers.
Okay.
And they were in the room with us all the time. And I think that Dick and Jenna, it was important that, because Jenna was one of the creators, that there were women writers involved, and having Rick and Liz as a partnership, it feels to me like they kind of mirrored that relationship.
And Dick and Jenna were on the Carol Burnett show. So
right.
It was sort of like the whole machine kind of moved over.
Exactly.
To turn these sketches into sitcom. And then they went on to create Facts of Life.
Right. That's right.
So
Yeah.
I was like, I know that name, and it's from kind of looking at Facts of Life. Again, very strong in the female numbers, Mama's Family, both in front of and behind the camera, particularly on the writing. So what happens next for you after Mama's Family?
So Mama's Family gets canceled, and then they bring it back, and they don't bring me. Everybody on Mama's Family stand up. Not so fast, Eric. So
Or
there
Karen.
I was.
They didn't bring Karen.
Or Karen. It's life. I was sad because I liked the job. And so I started auditioning for things, and I got close to 1 million on 1 million things. I auditioned for Karate Kid and with John Avildsen working his video camera, and he didn't have a windscreen, so he used a sponge mop. I met Coppola for The Outsiders in his apartment at the Sherry Netherland Hotel. I was called on a Sunday morning saying, "Can you come to the Sherry Netherland at 6:00 to meet with Francis Ford Coppola?" And I auditioned Pretty in Pink. Matthew Broderick always beat me out for everything. He still stole my life, but that's okay because still have a good life. And at some point, I'm like, okay, this isn't something. I gotta shake things up. I gotta make things happen. So I started doing production work, and I did every job on a movie set that you can think of. I was a sound man. Actually, I wasn't I'd never worked in the camera department. I always wanted to, but I did first AD on a lot of things. I was a production sound mixer, a boom operator. I was a grip, electric, all that other stuff with an eye towards writing and directing. And I wrote a bunch of scripts. I was commissioned to write a couple of scripts from some of the producers I'd worked with. I was supposed to direct a movie that got canceled right before we started shooting. And that was like, I've had it. I'm done. I had to get out. And so my then girlfriend, still wife, we packed up our bags and we moved to Monterey, California, because it was the nicest place we could think of to be depressed in. And first thing I did when I got to Monterey, I got a job in a video store renting movies to people that I was in. So that's its own sitcom. That's its own sitcom or its own tragedy, depending on how you think about it. But it was okay. It was fine. And then I went to community college and studied political science and transferred to Berkeley, went to Berkeley. I worked on the Clinton campaign in 92 as a volunteer coordinator, and I did campaign advance. And after college, we moved to Japan and taught English for a couple of years, had a baby. And then we moved to DC, and I got a job as a press secretary for Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez of Queens and Brooklyn. And she's still there. Then I got a job as a communications director for an environmental nonprofit whose motto was more fun, less stuff, which seemed cool to me. And then from there, I got hired as the communications director for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which is a $15 billion charitable foundation in Silicon Valley, and moved back to the Bay Area in 2003 for 11 years. And after that, we quit our jobs and sold our house and traveled around the world for a year. Because we could, we shipped our kid off to college and figured we'd take the, what do we call it? The nest, like the family nest, and we would burn it and we would eat the ashes. And that's what we did. So, I mean, we did the thing that we wanted to do when we could do it. And then
that is fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
We came back to the city, and I've been consulting for foundations and nonprofits for the last 9 years. And my clients are the ones you would think of, the MacArthur Foundation and the big foundations.
And you consult in communication strategy.
Yeah.
How to make sure that when you call up the New York Post about your chicken found in Queens,
totally, you have a goal.
Also mention that you're looking for what you're looking for, a home for the chicken.
That's really all I did.
And $3 million for your fund.
Exactly.
Hey, now that you've enjoyed the chicken story,
I go, well, I'm proud of my failures. You need to be transparent about what you learn.
At 12.
At 12.
You should tell them about what you learned at 9.
They don't want to know. It's funny. I did have the other side of the world is going to catch up with me on this one, but I had a client who saw my IMDb page, which has a not a great picture with me and Sylvia Christel. And she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that." So,
like that's my evil twin.
Every so often the worlds collide, but not really. But the funniest thing is that, it's nice. I work with these really great organizations doing wonderful work and things like that. And we'll be in a conversation and about whatever we're doing, the environment or something. And then someone will say, oh, did you know Eric was on Mama's Family? And then someone's like, oh, really? Wow. That like, okay, great. The most interesting thing about me happened 40 years ago. How do you feel?
No, just
Now
the
I'm
most
interested.
Hollywood thing about you.
Yes.
The showbiz
All
element
of
is
a
very
sudden I'm
attractive to
interested.
people. Saving the world is good too.
I was just a schmo a minute ago. Now I'm interesting. Oh, and the other thing is that, as it happens, I'm sure you've never heard of this, but I also have a podcast which is called Let's Hear It. You can find it at letshearitcast.com. And it is a very specialized thing, which is the nice thing about podcasting is you can pick a little thing and have fun with it. And we interview people in philanthropy who are doing communications and messaging and that sort of thing. And it's a thing for people who do my job, who are communications support for foundations and nonprofits. In philanthropy we are all, I think right now, trying to figure out how do we solve or address some of these huge challenges. You can't walk down the street or pick up a newspaper without seeing that there's so much to be done. And philanthropy is one way to address it. It's only one way to address it, but I work with large foundations and small nonprofits who are working on the environment or education or like health, those sorts of things. And to be able to help those organizations spend their money more wisely to help more people is a good reason to get up in the morning. And I've been very, very lucky that I've had this bizarre winding road of a career and that it has led me to this interesting place. And it's fun. And it's been cool. When I was at the Hewlett Foundation, I traveled around the world, spent a lot of time in Africa and China and Europe working on these kinds of things, particularly on climate change, but also on women's health and other things. So it's been like, I'm the luckiest guy on earth. Matthew Broderick's had a good career, but,
What has he done for women
seriously,
and the environment?
telling you, they're great. Oh, I went to high school with Sarah Jessica Parker, and she's fabulous. So
Oh, okay.
I went to the professional children's school for a senior after they kicked me out of St. Francis Prep for doing that movie.
Did they really?
Yeah, they did.
Oh my
They
goodness.
kicked you out of school for doing the movie.
Well,
kind of.
they said that we think you'd do better in a school that is more aligned with the things that you're doing professionally. So that's a very Franciscan way of saying, please get out of our school. But I went to high school with Sarah Jessica Parker and who else? Trini Alvarado. I don't know if you know Trini. She was in Little Women.
Okay, yeah.
Diane Lane I'd never met her. She never
Diane.
showed up, but she was there.
She was
on the
busy.
thing. She was busy. And a bunch of other people. So those years were great.
I was going to say, were those years where everybody sitting around having been got a call this
God, we had so much fun. High school is great.
high school with a bunch of children, adults?
Remember Bugsy Malone, that movie with
Yes. It was that.
that's what it was. It was like Bugsy Malone. We're all sitting in the saloon, all these 12-year-olds sitting in a saloon, shooting things.
Bugsy Malone. God, that's so funny. All right. So I have a question that you may not be able to answer, but being as you work with these very large nonprofits that are doing, and small nonprofits that are doing work of trying to better the world and save the world and help people, what can a person do? Because I think people want to know what's impactful now. What can they do? There's so many problems and so many things that feel urgent. What can one person do? What might be your advice to someone who's like, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do or where to start?
I always tell people, pick a thing. This is in particular when people come to me looking for a job. They'll say, what do I do with my career? I say, pick the thing you're most passionate about and just do that thing. And it's not your responsibility to solve every problem in the world. Apply the things that you're good at to the issues that you care about, and you'll be fulfilled, and you'll also do the greatest amount of good with your skills and your wherewithal. And I think that's important because we all want to live meaningful lives. There's no shortage of causes. And it would be crazy to think that you could do them all. Just pick the thing that you care about and do that. You know, if it's animal protection, that's important. There's also environmental things in which the beneficiaries are so far beyond anything you'll ever know. But I think that's great. And I think those are lives well lived. And I see a lot of people who are working really hard at a very narrow thing, but they really believe in it and they're doing meaningful work. And we need that. We need much more of that. And so, if you have a skill or you have something interesting in an organization you care about, volunteer your time, call them up, say, I'd like to help. And you'll see the kind of response you get from people. They're craving it. They're really hungry for that kind of connection with other folks who are going to help them advance their work. So that's my advice.
All right. Okay. Where can people find you?
My firm is called Brownbridge Strategies. So I'm at brownbridgestrategies.com. And you listen to the podcast if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Podcasts are fun. And I think that niche of finding your audience and addressing the needs of that audience or the desires of that audience, I'm not sure how many people need the 80s TV ladies, except for me, maybe Sharon. So,
I need it.
Definitely. Me too.
Well, we want to be connected to the things that matter to us. And during our childhood, if those were shows that we watched when they first came on, there's something valuable in that. Or people are now discovering these great characters and these great shows that is bringing joy into people's lives. That's good too. I mean, these are trying times.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find something lovely in it or meaningful, then you're doing a great thing. So I love that.
I think joy is a big part of being able to sort of keep going, right? Like being able to laugh at yourself and being able to also go, this is kind of like my own group therapy with Harvey Korman and Mama.
The wonder to me is that you are not the slasher.
You are not the slasher. Okay, I love the story.
I've told it 500.
Oh my God, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for sharing all these stories with us and
delightful.
And these memories.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to reminisce.
Thank you.
The audiography for today includes Mama's Family. You can find viewing on Roku, Amazon, and many more links, which will be on our website. You can also check out Eric's company at brownbridgestrategies.com.
His podcast can be found at letshearitcast.com. And the blog about the amazing trip around the world he and his wife took can be found at eatbicker.love. That link will also be on our website.
Thank you so much for listening to 80s TV Ladies. Please look for us at all your favorite social media sites at 80s TV Ladies. Like, follow, and tell your friends.
As always, we hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.